Meditations in an Emergency by Frank O'Hara. Am I to become profligate as if I were a blonde, or religious as if I were French? Each time my heart is broken, it makes me feel more adventurous, and how the same names keep recurring on that interminable list. But one of these days there will be nothing left with which to venture forth. Why should I share you? Why don't you get rid of someone else for a change? I am the least difficult of men. All I want is boundless love. Even trees understand me. Good heavens, I lie under them too, don't I? I'm just like a pile of leaves. However, I've never clogged myself with praises of pastoral life, nor with nostalgia for an innocent past of perverted acts and pastures. No. One need never leave the confines of New York to get all the greenery one wishes. I can't even enjoy a blade of grass unless I know there's a subway handy, or a record store, or some other sign that people do not totally regret life. It is more important to affirm the least sincere. The clouds get enough attention as it is, and even they continue to pass. Do they know what they're missing? Uh-huh. My eyes are vague blue like the sky and change all the time. They are indiscriminate but fleeting, entirely specific and disloyal, so that no one trusts me. I am always looking away, or again at something after it has given me up. It makes me restless, and that makes me unhappy, but I cannot keep them still. If only I had gray, green, black, brown, yellow eyes, I would stay at home and do something. It's not that I'm curious. On the contrary, I am bored, but it's my duty to be attentive. I am needed by things as the sky must be above the earth. And lately, so great has their anxiety become, I can spare myself little sleep. Now, there is only one man I love to kiss when he is unshaven. Heterosexuality, you are inexorably approaching. How discourage her? Saint Serapion, I wrap myself in the robes of your whiteness, which is like midnight in Dostoevsky. How am I to become a legend, my dear? I've tried love, but that hides you in the bosom of another, and I am always springing forth from it like the lotus, the ecstasy of always bursting forth. But one must not be distracted by it. Or, like a hyacinth, to keep the filth of life away. Yes, there. Even in the heart, where the filth is pumped in and slanders and pollutes and determines. I will my will, though I may become famous for a mysterious vacancy in that department, that greenhouse. Destroy yourself if you don't know. It is easy to be beautiful. It is difficult to appear so. I admire you, beloved, for the trap you've set. It's like a final chapter no one reads because the plot is over. Fanny Brown has run away, scampered off with a cornet of a horse. I do love that little minx and hope she may be happy, though she has vexed me by this exploit a little too. Poor silly Cecina, or FB as we used to call her. I wish she had a good whipping and 10,000 pounds. Mrs. Thrall. I've got to get out of here. I choose a piece of shawl and my dirtiest suntans. I'll be back. I'll reemerge, defeated from the valley. You don't want me to go where you go, so I go where you don't want me to. It's only afternoon. There's a lot ahead. There won't be any mail downstairs. Turning, I spit in the lock, and the knob turns.
Reginald Rose was one of a group of live TV playwrights who came around in the 1950s when television was new, when it was all broadcast live. He wrote a lot of important teleplays for an anthology called Studio One. The most important was 12 Angry Men, which was adapted as a very famous film. After the live anthologies kind of died out in the early 60s, Rose had an opportunity to create a show for CBS, and he created The Defenders. The Defenders was essentially a legal procedural about two defense attorneys, a father and son team played by E.G. Marshall and Robert Reed. It was in many ways the most important show on the air in the early 60s. It won the Emmy for Best Drama 3 years consecutively. It really was on the front line of an attempt to do quality, topical, serious-minded programming within episodic TV at a time when kind of mindless sitcoms and violent action shows were getting a toehold on the airwaves. The Defenders played it smart. They didn't launch themselves with the most controversial material. They kind of went out in the first season with some fairly typical courtroom drama type material, and then gradually started working in the more controversial topics after the advertisers were on board and the network was satisfied with what they were going to be about.
So the writers turn in this script about a cannibal.
A cannibal lawyer?
The director eats up all this time, refusing to do it, like his resume isn't filled with crap. And surprise, the writers have only one other script ready.
On April 20th, 1962, the Defenders ran an episode called The Benefactor. And in the opening sequence, before the titles, a doctor is arrested by the police in the middle of performing an illegal abortion. The doctor tells his attorneys, the main characters in the show, that he wants to put the law on trial. Abortion was an issue that affected everyone. It was an extremely controversial topic that people just wanted to keep unspoken and swept under the table. Essentially, the plot line was about a doctor who performed abortions, but what it was really doing was challenging viewers and challenging society to think about the law and about abortion. Euphemism was very big in television in the early 60s. I mean, there were things that topics you couldn't address at all, and then topics that you couldn't say aloud. The famous example is that on I Love Lucy, some years earlier, when Lucy got pregnant, they couldn't say the word pregnant. She was with child, or she was expecting, or some euphemism. And that was one of the rules that the Defenders broke, because with few exceptions, when they addressed the subject, they talked about it.
They used the word abortion 30 times in 51 minutes.
Why?
Because they show one. Opening scene. Exactly.
That kind of word counting was sort of how they thought about it. It was less about the ideas than about the kind of superficial things that would provoke people. Publicly, the network was confident about The Benefactor and its merit, but I'm sure privately they thought it would be a huge disaster for the network, for them, for advertisers. Controversy at that time was bad. Any kind of controversy was just something you wanted to avoid. So the Defenders had 3 regular sponsors who alternated sponsoring each episode, and all 3 of them took a look at The Benefactor and said, no dice, we want nothing to do with this.
This discussion, it's uncomfortable. This show is troubling.
Ultimately, what happened is that the Spidell Watch Corporation bought full sponsorship of The Benefactor, and it did go on the air as one of the last episodes of the first season.
Then you went to Dr. Montgomery for an abortion?
Yes.
The ratings were good. They weren't through the roof, but they were good enough to keep the show on the air, and I have to imagine that the Spidell company got a pretty good discount for being willing to take a chance on that show. I think that's why The Benefactor is important. It proved to everyone who had a financial interest in the show that you could do that and you could get away with it and everybody would come out looking good. It's always going to be difficult to get something controversial or topical or meaningful on the air because people want escapism, and there's always going to be resistance from the people who fund these things. And television is an art form. When it is an art form, that costs millions of dollars to do a show, and so it's always going to be an uphill struggle. And the Defenders found a way to do it in the early 60s that was more or less unique to that show, and after The Benefactor, that really set it. The Benefactor, I think, was the template for all of the subsequent episodes of the Defenders.
My name is Andres Soltner. And what I'm doing?
What do you do for a living?
Oh, for living? Well, for living, I'm eating. When I was a kid, like 6, 7, I cooked a little with my mother, and I liked it, but didn't think to be a chef later on. And then, at age of 14, I wanted to be a cabinet maker, because my father was a cabinet maker. And my mother said, no way, your older brother is already cabinet maker, I don't want two in the same trade. And I said, no problem, I want to be a chef. I want to be a cook. So that was, I was 14 and a half. Okay, I show you to do the apple tart, Alsatian apple tart. We have to do the pastry first. We do a pâte brisée, it's called a pâte brisée. So I have here a cup and a third of flour. We put about a half teaspoon of salt. We put half a spoon of sugar. And we put one stick of butter. We put it in little pieces. Cold is better. Now we mix the butter with the flour. The main thing is that is mixed very, very well. Now take an egg. Here we have our pâte brisée. Now this pastry has to rest now. The best thing is that it rests for about an hour minimum. After my release from the army, I went to work in Paris for 5 years. And after the 5 years, an American came and took me in to come to New York to open Lutèce in '61. I didn't open Lutèce as the owner, I opened Lutèce as the chef. And after 2 years, I wanted to go back to France. So I said, no, I want to go back to France. And the owner said, you want to go back to France? Are you kidding? Now we're doing much better. And if you stay, I take you as a partner. And about in '70, our partnership was a little shaky. And I said to my partner, I think we go to stop this thing. He said, we go to stop it, but you don't leave, I leave. And that's when I became sole owner of Lutèce. And then I kept Lutèce until we sold 1994. Now that we have the pastry, we need about 3, 4 apples. My preference are Golden Delicious, but you can use any kind, you know. But Golden Delicious, that's really what I prefer. Now we core them. Be very carefully that you take all the core out here, otherwise it's like wood. Now we slice them. See, just make sure that you do it all at the same size, not one bigger than the other, otherwise they don't cook at the same time. Now it depends what apples you take. If you take apples which are a little less sweet, you can add a little bit of sugar. But Golden Delicious, you don't need that. At the beginning, the people who were interested in good food, in food, they came little by little. But then about 10 years later, you name it, and that's it. Everybody came, you know. We refused hundreds of people every day. We were friends with the whole world, really, you know. The presidents, the kings, the ambassadors, the movie stars, everybody came. But we didn't have only movie stars and presidents. We had also people which we didn't know, and we took just as much care for them too, or a little more. We take our pastry. Has to be about 1/8 of an inch. See, about 1/8 of an inch. You see, you take your finger and you push it down like that. Voila. Now you can do this tart with any fruit. It doesn't have to be with apples. Now depends if the fruit are like cherries or so. If there is a lot of moisture in, take a little almond flour. You see, and just put a little almond flour. For the apples you don't need it really because there is not too much moisture in. Little pieces we can put them in here. And we put it in the oven about 350, 375. And we leave that for about 15 to 20 minutes in the oven. And we check if the apples are soft. If the apples are soft, then we put the flan on. Not before, otherwise if you put the flan, when the apples are not soft, they never will be soft, they never will be cooked enough. You know, I still have the roots from Alsace, so certain dishes like this tart, I did it like my mother did. The difference of tart Alsacienne is when the fruits are baked, we make a flan, a sort of flan, put the flan on and finish it. That gives the name of Alsacienne. We need a 1/2 cup of sugar. I measured before, that's a 1/2 cup. We need 1 large egg or 2 smalls. Okay, we put the eggs and the sugar first. It's very important that the sugar is melted before you put the cream in. You put about a spoon of kirsch. If you wish, you can put a drop of vanilla. Doesn't have to be, but a drop of vanilla is good. Okay, and that's ready now. Our flan is ready. As soon the apples are soft, we put the flan. We leave it then for another 10 minutes on 375, and our tart will be ready. You see, you check if the apples are soft. They are soft enough now. Now we are ready to put our flan on. Now we put it back for another 10 minutes. 10 minutes will be ready. All right. Et voilà, tarte aux pommes alsacienne.
My name is Max Klimavicius, and I'm the managing partner at Saudi's restaurant. Saudi's first opened in 1921 by two immigrants. Their name was Vincent and Eugenia Saudi, and they opened a small restaurant down the block from where we are today, and they called it the Little Restaurant. And it was called the Little Restaurant because it was right next to a little theater, which is today called the Helen Hayes. The Little Restaurant stayed in business for about 5 to 6 years. It eventually closed when they tore it down to build the St. James Theater. From there, we moved to the present location in 1927, and we've been here ever since. In the late 1920s, when he opened the restaurant, I mean, we were in a deep recession, in a depression, and yet he provided a home for all these actors that were struggling and they didn't have money to pay, and he carried their debts, and some of them never even paid. As a matter of fact, when he died, Vincent Saudi Jr. found a chest full of IOUs that he kept. Anybody that has been anybody in the theater business have been through Saudis.
When I met Max, he was a busboy. And I've always been friendly and talking to him, and I also was friends with Mr. Saudi Jr. So we're all a family here. We all, the people that come regularly. You can always eat here, you can just do everything. Everybody comes here. All the theater people come here.
The criteria for getting your caricature on the wall is not so much that you have to be a star, but you have to be a friend of the house.
When I turned 65, I have my own caricature here. For me, it's really amazing. I also found that I'm the only second press agent, not only just African American, but I'm only other press agent. The other one was Alex Cohen. So there's only 2 press agents on the wall, and I'm the second one.
Saudi's is a multi-level operation that started as a 1-floor operation, and now we have 4 floors. The first and second floors are public dining rooms. Third floors are offices and storage room, and 4th floor, where we are now, is a banquet hall. Over the years, we have lost a number of caricatures, and some of them have been big losses. Such is the one as Jimmy Cagney. We lost Jimmy Cagney the day after he passed away. And the reason that we lost it is because these caricatures are removable. You can take them away from the wall. And the reason for that is because when Vincent Saudi Sr. signed his first lease, it was stipulated that anything that was permanently mounted to the structure became part of the building. So he figured that if he was ever going to move out of here, he would take these pictures with him. We serve what we call continental cuisine. We have a multi-ethnic approach to cooking. We have some old dishes that we've carried for years and years and years that people still ask for, but we also have light fares as well. We have the shrimp Saudi, which our chef is going to cook for you guys today.
Alors, we are going to prepare some sauté shrimp, what we call at the restaurant shrimp sardis. All right, it's a regular Gulf shrimp who have been shelled. You need to season them salt and pepper. So we are going to put some olive oil. 2-3 minutes on each side. Don't be afraid, it has to be very garlicky. And then now really the secret of that dish is the sauce we made with the shell, of the shrimp shell. Shrimp shell, vegetable, white wine, tomatoes, a lot of garlic again. Tiny little butter inside. And voila, here is the shrimp sardis. A bit of chives.
Saudi's is a magic place, and I don't know what it has, but I know that it will always be here. It's an incredible place.
You asking if I've seen these before?
A couple of dressmakers in the early 20s during the flapper era, Ida Rosenthal and Enid Bissett, had a dress shop, and they really believed that women's curves should be celebrated. So they introduced these cups that they inserted with a piece of elastic inside the dresses. It became a rage. Women loved it. They came up with the idea of, why don't we make a bra out of this? And then in 1926, Ida's husband, William, patented the Maidenform uplift brassiere. The original bra had no elastics, it had no wire, it had no strap adjustments. It was made out of a cotton material. And if you look at the business today and the bras today, the bras are made out of very fit, flexible materials, stretch foam. All the bras have an adjustable strap, which, by the way, Maidenform invented in the 40s. The Dream campaign started right after World War II and lasted from 1949 to 1969, and really focused on dream sequences, fantasies, and really celebrated women's independence. It was extremely revolutionary for the time. It was the first time that women were seen in their underwear in public places. When the ads initially broke, women were coming out of the workplace, their husbands were away at war, and they had this new sense of independence, and new experiences, conquering new desires, aspirations, and it's really women acting out their fantasies in an ad. The ads were perceived as shockingly risque. Mad Magazine, as a matter of fact, did a whole spoof on it that said, I dreamed I was arrested for indecent exposure. Good controversy, though. It was a huge success, and it sold a lot of bras.
We're going to need another box of brassieres.
The bra that was featured in the 1949 campaign and was sold through the 50s and 60s was called a chansonnette bra, and it was probably the most popular bra maybe ever. It sold over 90 million bras in over 100 countries.
The Playtex people are jealous.
They positioned themselves very differently from how Maidenform was positioned.
They would like to do what Maidenform is doing, not what we're doing.
Playtex was positioned as a much more conservative, functional.
From what I understand, Playtex has an amazing bra.
Traditional garment. As a matter of fact, in their ads, they showed women with their clothes on. The bra was actually on a mannequin. They went to market almost at polar opposites to each other. The decision to put women in public settings was really to set the company apart. Maidenform has a long history of really revolutionary marketing and product to really make an emotional connection with women. Additionally, to give women a sense of empowerment. And then during the 80s, we used men describing how they perceive women.
Bras are for men.
I went to sleep in my bra, and I thought I was so-and-so.
Thank you for that.
This company has always pushed the limit. I mean, to show women in their bras in the 40s, I mean, it's really incredible. But then when you think about what was going on in this country in the mid and late 60s, it was really ahead of the culture in a lot of ways, this whole liberal movement and the women being more empowered. So it's kind of interesting because the campaign kind of led society. And I can't speak for the whole fashion industry, but when you look at what Maidenform did, to actually step out like that when they're already leading the market, I think it's really a tribute to the vision of the founders of the company.
This definitely moves you into Maidenform's neighborhood.
Let Maidenform have women's imaginations. We'll take their money.
The Manor Shop Liberty Valance is one of John Ford's last films. So in some ways, it's a film that represents an entire career of both John Ford and also of John Wayne. The film itself is very nostalgic. It's a movie that begins with a flashback, and you already understand that this is some kind of eulogy. It is a typical Western in some ways. It's shot in black and white in 1962, which is unusual, so it's meant to kind of be a part of a much older genre of the Western, and it revolves around a mystery of who killed Liberty Valance. The film has classic Western tropes: good versus evil, the bad guy in town who wears black, the good guy who is standing up for the honest people of the town. It also pits the frontier against civilization. In these ways, it plays with absolutely every cliché in the American West. But what's interesting about the film is it doesn't just repeat those cliches, it's actually very ambivalent about those cliches, so that at the end of the film, it's not really clear if having civilized and tamed the West is really a good thing or not. And there's a lot of sadness and ambivalence at the end of the film. The movie is self-conscious as a Western about Westerns, and not just a film that kind of recapitulates the myth of the American frontier and the American West, but is also a movie that's very aware of itself as a film about the American West. And so in that way, it's a kind of breakaway Western and ends classic Westerns and also anticipates what happens with Westerns after the 60s. This film came out in 1962, so it makes perfect sense that, Pete Campbell can, in passing tell Peggy that he and Trudy went to see the film.
Trudy and I saw Liberty Valance. It goes along for a while, and then it takes a turn and ends up exactly where you thought it was going. John Wayne shot him. Oh, have you seen it yet?
He then, of course, reveals, who shot Liberty Valance in typical Pete Campbell way. But why does this make sense for Mad Men? Because movies about the American frontier in the Kennedy era with the new frontier have an echo, so that whereas we once had the Wild West, Kennedy built up the American space program in order to create the new frontier.
All right, left off and the clock is started.
There's also this issue of old-fashioned ways and newfangled ways.
American Airlines is not about the past any more than America is. There is no such thing as American history, only a frontier.
You see that in Sterling Cooper being a kind of white shoe firm that, wants to be in the game, but actually also likes to do business the old-fashioned way. And in some ways that you see that tension in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance between the kind of lawlessness and then playing by the rules. One of the most important aspects of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. Westerns are where history becomes myth and legend. So if one of the messages of the film is print the legend, then there's no question that The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is important, because it really says that we are a society based on spin. We think of it coming from a much more kind of contemporary media society like the one in Mad Men. But I think the continuity between The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and our own society of spin is precisely that this Western shows us that really people want legend and they want untruths, and they're much happier to have those myths perpetuated than have the harsh realities of life actually displayed. It really makes you think about, in a sense, what are the fictions we tell ourselves about our history. And also it makes us think in a kind of nostalgic, sad way about what's lost as much as what's gained when you tame the West. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance certainly, in 1962, was really aware of making their characters and their situations more complex. And so in that way, you could see it as not just the end of the Western cycle and genre, but really as the kind of beginning of rethinking the Western, and the revisions of the American Western start with The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
It's a Rothko. Why the hell didn't Dale say that?
Mark Rothko was one of the great American artists of the mid-20th century. He was born in 1903 in Russia. His family were Russian Jews who emigrated to Oregon in 1913 when he was 10. And so in the 1940s, when he was sort of figuring out what he wanted to do as an artist with his peers, he was in his 40s. A lot of the artists of his generation got a rather late start because of the Depression. They all grew up during World War II, and there's no question in my mind that the experience of the Depression and of the war did have a huge impact on their desire to create a new way of painting. What he and his fellow painters did at the end of the 1940s was begin a kind of painting that people hadn't seen before. A painting that didn't have a subject. The canvases were full of color or full of line or full of shape, but didn't describe a man or landscape with any kind of obviousness. Instead, the canvases were supposed to express feeling, emotion, universal values, and this was very new and hugely influential. Mark Rothko wanted his paintings to express at a level beyond language. There's a famous quotation of his in which he said, "Silence is so accurate." So there's a connection between his work and silence. And the way he achieved that was through color. Instead of color describing a sky or color describing an object, the color is out there alone, floating, and each canvas becomes this universe in which the colors on it are the only actors, and the relationship between a viewer and the painting is controlled by their personal reaction.
So it's smudgy squares, huh? That's interesting.
Rothko preferred his work to be shown in smaller spaces because he wanted the experience to be intimate. He didn't want it to be this grand thing that you admired from afar. He liked his paintings to be hung rather low so that a person could almost feel like they were at a level together with the painting, not looking up at something, but really connecting to it in a physical way. So it's not just about the eyes when you're with a Rothko, it's about your whole body. There is a lot of mythology around Mark Rothko and his painting. He felt that these paintings were not about expressing his own feelings, but were really attempts to get at a way of expressing human emotion and the awareness of being a human being and the awareness of being in the world together with other human beings at such a sublime level. Yeah, there are often metaphors made to a kind of spiritual experience or a kind of religious experience when you're with those works. But I'm also a little suspicious of that because people can get carried away. The important thing is to have an honest experience yourself.
How does it strike you?
Sir, I know nothing about art.
In the 1950s, the point at which his popularity grew, he was making the kinds of paintings that are probably his best known, which are reds and yellows and beautiful bright oranges and blues and greens, and colors that just are beautiful. There's no other way to describe it. In a sense, he became suspicious of his own work when it became so successful. It went against his way of thinking of the artist as a kind of loner. So he actually stopped painting these very brightly colored canvases. And as of the late 1950s and all during the decade of the 1960s, primarily made work in tones of grays and browns and blacks. Mark Rothko did find a circle of supporters who really believed in his work. And this small group of loyal supporters were enough to build the reputation, so much so that by the time Mark Rothko had a retrospective exhibition here at the Museum of Modern Art in 1961, he was really greeted as a superstar. The visual impact of a Rothko painting has so much to do with the experience of the person standing before the real painting. In order to understand a Rothko painting, you really have to see paintings in person. You have to go to museums and realize that your interaction, your body's interaction, your brain's interaction, your eyes' interaction with these colors and with these shapes on these rectangular canvases has a lot to do with things that you can't really name or describe.
Maybe you're just supposed to experience it. Because when you look at it, you do feel something, right?
With something like these large fields of color, it's really hard to say that anything can even begin to approach the real thing.
It's like looking into something very deep. You could fall in.
That's true.
We would replace power rooted in possession, privilege, or circumstance by power and uniqueness rooted in love, reflectiveness, reason, and creativity.
That's a beautiful sentiment. Growing up in the 50s, it was a very dead time in terms of political action. But once the sit-ins started in the South in 1960, that provided an opportunity for white kids like me to show our support directly. Students for a Democratic Society. That's a hell of a focus group.
And it became known as Students for Democratic Society. We were heavily influenced by the direct action of the Southern students. And so we invented programs that were meant to take direct action against national chain stores that were segregating in the South. And this method was called direct action.
We picketed in Ann Arbor, Michigan, the 5 and 10 cent store, the Woolworths, that was where the sit-ins were happening.
What motivated me was a younger generation, mainly African American, risking their necks to fight segregation in the South, which made me and thousands of my generation move south to fight in the civil rights movement.
I think a lot of young people in the late 50s and early 60s began to get the idea that they could create the new because there was such stagnation. Or the kids in the South who said, we're sick of this sort of passiveness of the adult African American community in the South. We're going to take direct action. We're going to use our bodies. We're going to break segregation directly. It was that moment in time that really helped to shape the Port Huron Statement.
In late 1961, I was in jail in Albany, Georgia, and I was trying to think about this statement. The idea was 5 or 6 pages, but it became insane. It became 50 or 60 pages, and it almost failed in its purpose because it was too much. We were at a camp given to us by the United Auto Workers in Port Huron, Michigan, and we were there for 5-6 days. There were 60 or 63 of us, and we sorted out this massive document by sitting in small groups.
I know, at one point I stayed up 24 straight hours debating and writing a certain section of the document. We didn't sleep really until it was over. I mean, it was that kind of intensity.
There would be one group on values, one group on economics, one group on politics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it became known as the Port Huron Statement. We mimeographed it off on a Gestetner, and we sold it for 25 cents. And to our surprise, it sold and sold and sold. I think people were actually stealing it.
This whole concept is deep.
At the time of Port Huron, we had no civil rights legislation. And so that was the highest priority for the young people who were there, is can we get an end to segregation?
We thought we could win. We were in that idealistic phase. This is before the war in Vietnam, before the murder of John F. Kennedy, where we thought a new social movement, the black students in the South, young people in the South, campuses across the country, would ignite a better consciousness among our elders, and the country could change through movements pushing the Democratic Party to realign in a more progressive direction. And I've always held that this could have happened can't say would have, but could have happened. There's only a few times in your life when something is written that expresses the moment, and everybody wants to read it. It circulated wildly, and there was an awakening going on. An awakening. Everybody was young. I was 21. Martin Luther King was considered the older generation. He was 31. Bobby Kennedy was that age, John Kennedy. So it seemed to be the document that expressed the vision and the values and the way forward.
This process of participatory democracy has expanded. Just take the presidential election in 2008. This vast organization of people, or networks of people that supported Obama and worked actively.
The Obama presidency departs from where Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King left off. There was a time when there was a broad movement that was excited by the goals of Port Huron, by the idea of participatory democracy, by social movements having an honored place in the American story. And if you listen to the Obama speech, he says all the good things in our country that we love came from social movements. It came from people knocking on doors, sit-ins, strikes, going to jail, from callous hand to callous hand. In that sense, I think Port Huron is quite relevant and remains to be superseded by a new generation.
It's how our generation feels.
Women right now already have a fantasy, and it's not going up the Nile. It's right here in America. Jackie Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe was the greatest sex icon of the 1950s, the early 1960s. She was also a great comic actress and probably one of the best photographic models of that era. One of the things about Marilyn that is so extraordinary is the way this lady loved mystery and the way she loved to conceal who she was. She wore disguises a lot. And when she took off the makeup and put a scarf over her head, she didn't look like Marilyn. She could do what she wanted, go places she wanted, and have some very secret affairs with people. She was involved with many of the most famous men of her era, and she married two of them, Joe DiMaggio and Arthur Miller. She was very sweet, very gentle, and often in her private life, not particularly sexual. At the same time that she was all of those things, she was a very brilliant woman, and she wanted to be in control. With regard to her death, the circumstances are both clear and extremely elusive. We know what killed her because that's in the autopsy report. We don't know how the overdose of drugs occurred. I believe there to have been a cover-up on the part of the police department. They did not interview major witnesses. They did not interview the people who were there that night until a long time after. The specimens that had been taken and sent to the lab disappeared. Over time, a lot of people have gotten involved in which they speculate that the Kennedys killed her, the mafia killed her, the CIA killed her, Jimmy Hoffa killed her. You see, people have fabricated stories about what happened that night, and they have by and large been believed. So if the people who actually know what happened that night tell what they know, is anybody going to believe them at this point? Marilyn has become a kind of icon through which people want to interpret themselves. A lot of this began with Madonna in the 80s because one of Madonna's personas was definitely Marilyn. The 7-year-old photo where she's standing over the grate and the skirt is flying up, those exquisite photographs that Milton Green took of her encourage a lot of interest in her because they're beautiful to look at. People said when she sent out her sexuality, it was irresistible. She could, in fact, radiate through her eyes deep into herself, and that would come out. All the feelings that she had at any particular point would come out, and that was the brilliance of Marilyn. Many people say to me, why are you teaching a class on Marilyn Monroe? And I say to them, she's as important as Eleanor Roosevelt. Why not Marilyn Monroe? She's very, very important.
Many people believe the Freedom Ride started in 1961, but actually there was an earlier Freedom Ride called the Journey of Reconciliation that was actually a joint project of the Fellowship of Reconciliation and CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. The Freedom Riders of 1961 decided that they would penetrate the Deep South.
We had Bobby Kennedy, #1 as Attorney General. And his brother, John, was a little upset that we were making the United States look so bad.
We're saying that communism is about totalitarianism, it's about intolerance, it's about oppression, yet we see in America that these very same things are happening. So the Freedom Rides were actually calling into question America's high moral position.
We got on a train to go to Jackson, Mississippi. And on that train, there was no segregation. When we got off, the facilities were segregated in Jackson. We were told to go, the white people were told to go to the colored only, and the black people were supposed to go to the white only. Or if we went anywhere together, we'd go together and integrate the counters.
We were following, as Martin Luther King also followed, the notion of nonviolent activism, which originated with Mahatma Gandhi. The whole idea is to resist nonviolently. You also train the people who are going to be involved in this nonviolent participation. And that took place in the form of socio-dramas, in which we would role play really as realistically as possible, so that you could get a feeling for how to protect yourself, how to behave nonviolently when you are accosted or approached or confronted with violent acts. Mahatma Gandhi also had something that's called inner freedom, in which you sort of free yourself up on the inside so that you can participate with a free mind and not respond violently to violence.
Although the Justice Department and the FBI knew about these Freedom Rides, they were in many ways powerless to stop them.
All of the civil rights groups met and decided that if they called the rides off, it was going to wind up just like the 1947 situation, and that means segregation won again, and the federal government was unable to enforce its laws in the southern states. As a result of that meeting, they all decided they would continue the Freedom Rides.
So what happened was the Klan would show up for these events, and the police would not.
There was a huge mob that knew we were coming, and it was a very ugly mob.
They encountered violence in Birmingham, Alabama, where Bull Connor, who turned out the dogs and the hoses on children, and in Anniston, where the protesters were attacked, the tires were slashed, shot at, and then eventually fire bombs were thrown into the bus.
Photographs of that bus burning were on the front pages of newspapers around the world. And Kennedy was about to have a meeting with Khrushchev, and he did not have the moral authority if he was allowing this kind of treatment of his own citizens. He couldn't hardly tell Khrushchev how to treat his.
Eventually, John F. Kennedy did send federal marshals to the South to protect the Freedom Riders.
When the first violence occurred, that was not a reason to stop doing it, because then violence would have won. We went directly into what we spotted immediately as the white waiting room, because the sign was still there, and sat down as a group. And the chief of police asked us to leave. He said, "Are y'all gonna move?" And we didn't move. So
he said it 3 times.
He said it 3 times, and after that, we were arrested. We were taken out to the paddy wagon and sitting in the hot sun. This was July in Mississippi. We were pushed into the paddy wagon, and the door slammed, and that's when we realized, you're in here.
I didn't get my awakening until the doors closed at Partridge Penitentiary. That clanging shut of these electric doors, they didn't even use keys anymore. That's when I woke up and said, are those doors going to ever open again? But it gave you a chance to really think about your life, or what got you to that point, and what you were going to do when this was over, if it was ever over.
Why is transportation such a big issue? Well, you have to understand that blacks and whites used to ride on the same train cars in slavery, because everybody understood that a slave accompanying a master was an inferior. But after slavery, the lines between master-slave or inferior and superior were blurred.
The whole idea of interstate travel was, I didn't know what to call it back in those days, but it was something I had experienced, and experienced the segregation in the process. By the time the Freedom Ride opportunity came along in 1961, I was mentally prepared to go and do something about this if I could. The Freedom Rides were not just to get white people to sit next to black people or even just to use the same facilities. This was the United States, and we had a Constitution which says that all men are created equal. In my mind, I needed to help this country to be what it was supposed to be.
We must look at the 1961 Freedom Rides as perhaps not bringing about immediate change, but certainly contributing to an environment that is going to demand that these situations in terms of segregation of interstate transportation be changed.
We had a reunion, and we had almost all of the UCLA Freedom Riders. On the day Barack Obama was elected, I got calls from just about every one of them. And they said, you know, we had something to do with that, Bob. How do you feel about that? And I said, I feel just like you do. You felt that we helped knock down some of those gates that we didn't want the president to have to ride in the back of the bus.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish. We propose to accelerate the development of the appropriate lunar spacecraft. We propose to develop alternate liquid and solid fuel boosters, much larger than any now being developed, until certain which is superior.
The space race began when the Soviets launched Sputnik 1 on October 4th, 1957. Suddenly, space technology became an important pawn in the United States and Soviet Union rivalry. The potential military applications were limitless. The United States needed to regain superiority in the field of technology. Nearly 4 months later, the U.S. launched its first satellite, Explorer 1. On July 29, 1958, the Space Act was signed into law by President Eisenhower, and on October 1st, NASA was created. Eisenhower nominated Dr. T. Keith Glennon to be the first NASA administrator, with Dr. Hugh Dryden as deputy. Just 1 week later, Dr. Glennon approved the first U.S. manned spaceflight program, Project Mercury. The Soviet Union was the first to send a man into space when on April 12, 1961, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin orbited the Earth in his Vostok 1 spacecraft. This was a blow to the U.S. since they were preparing a suborbital manned spaceflight. 23 days later, astronaut Alan Shepard entered space on a suborbital mission, Freedom 7.
On the periscope, what a beautiful view.
President Kennedy had asked Vice President Lyndon Johnson to head a study of what was needed to beat the Soviets in the space race. On May 25, 1961, President Kennedy announced a new national goal. America would put a man on the moon before the end of the decade.
Now it is time to take longer strides. Time for a great new American enterprise. Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth.
On February 20th, 1962, a giant step was taken toward that national goal when Colonel John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth in Friendship 7.
Roger, 7. You have a go. At least 7 orbits.
Colonel Glenn instantly became a national hero. After his long journey, he was welcomed home by family, friends, and a cheering nation who bestowed him with honors. The apex of 3 years of effort, John Glenn's flight ignited new efforts to beat the Russians to the moon.
The 34 sedan?
Mostly.
What'd you do to it?
Made some improvements. It's got a 60 nail head, backed up 39 LaSalle transmission, and a 40 banjo rear end.
2 Fords and a Buick.
My name is Jimmy White. The company name is Circle City Hot Rods, and I'm the owner. It started for me with when I was 16. Well, even before then, you know, I was the kid that was taking apart his dad's lawnmower. You know, I was trying to figure out how to work. I obviously got in trouble for it.
You know anything about hot rods?
No.
Hot rods are stripped down versions of mostly Ford cars that guys back in the 30s, probably late 30s, pre-World War II, they started finding out ways if they took parts off the car, they were lighter and faster.
All motor, no weight.
They discovered, you know, that they could start hopping up the engines and doing stuff to the engines, taking weight off the cars, and they started racing, and it just kind of derived from there.
How fast does it go?
Well, that one does a quarter in 11 seconds. This one's gonna scare people.
The early dry lakes guys would probably be, you know, the pioneers. You know, the early speed equipment manufacturers, guys like Vic Edelbrock. You know, a lot of the guys that opened up the early speed shops. Alex Adzidius, he opened SoCal Speed Shop really early. You know, there's a lot of early drag racing pioneers. You know, the guys that were at the malt shop Friday night racing. Those are the early pioneers. Those are the guys that were making their cars faster and better. I think the term hot rod kind of was a media term. You'd see old newspaper clippings that said one hot rodder killed street racing and stuff like that. So it's kind of like a derogatory thing at first, but then with the dry lakes racing and drag racing and stuff like that, they started organizing it. The NHRA came along and they got guys off the street. They weren't street racing as much and they were taking it to the tracks. Modification process started with the cars. You know, a guy would get a 29 Roadster or a 32 Roadster or whatever, or a Model A Coupe, and the first thing would be to make the car lighter. So that's when the fenders would go, you know, and all the unnecessary stuff. And then as the guys would save their money, they would buy the necessary speed equipment to make the car faster, multiple carburation, you know, guys would build headers, exhaust. And then as money came around too, they would do the paint and body work and make it nicer. When you turn the key for the first time to fire up the engine, after you're done building the car, it's amazing. Like, everybody kind of just stands back and like, whoa, you know, it's running. You know, like, you see grown men turn into like high fives, you know, like it's just the general elation of the whole thing. The coolest thing I think about hot rods and cars is that you could give 10 guys the same car and it would be built 10 different ways.
My name is Kendra Flaherty, and the best way to get the Roadster I wanted was to build it. So I did. This is a Cadillac 390, and I've always loved Cadillacs and the motors. They're just a great motor. It was the first overhead V8. I love the power that it can make, and I have an Edelbrock 2.4 intake on it. And I chose the Baltic Blue because it's kind of girly, but not too girly. And yeah, it has E&J headlights on it and a 32 grill shell. It has front friction shocks. It has an Auburn dash in it that's turned backwards. It's quite a handful. I've never seen yet what it can totally do, but you have to be really gentle when you drive it, that's for sure. It's a really light car. It weighs, I don't know, maybe 1,200 pounds or 1,100 pounds or something. So you have to be really careful with it. I had no idea what I was doing. I really didn't. I still don't feel like I know very much, but I just read a lot of books and just did it. If you make a mistake, you could just redo whatever you built or the part that you had to build or fabricate. And you could just redo it until it's right. There aren't really a lot of women. I mean, there are some that they have husbands that have shops, and so they're around because of that, and they're around because they like it as well. But as far as anybody building one, I'm pretty much it, as far as I know.
I think a lot of the girls, their boyfriends are probably out in the garage and they're probably like, hey, I'm not in here in the house, like, I want to be out there.
It's hard to get taken seriously, but I understand, because if I saw a girl, honestly, I probably wouldn't believe she built it either. But mostly people are impressed. Some people with egos might not believe that you know what you're talking about, and that's the way it is.
Right now, hot rods are huge. And I think it's just because it's something kind of different.
Lots of young people that, are into it now that normally, 16-year-old kids, or even building cars with their parents, so the parents had maybe a hot rod in high school, and so now it's a good chance for the family to go out in the garage and build a car together.
A roadster is kind of like a Harley with 4 wheels. They want that sense of freedom. I get in my roadster and drive down the freeway going 75 miles an hour, and I feel like I'm unstoppable.
It's a way of expressing ourselves, of having specific cars like this especially. So it's kind of who you are as a person is your car. Like, if this car could be a person, it's me.
I'd like for it to last forever. Who knows? In 10 years from now, we might be driving around in hydrogen-powered vehicles, and these are going to be outlawed.
We do use a lot of gas, but our cars are, because we love our cars, they're well-tuned compared to some other people that might be on the freeway in front of you.
I can't really predict the future, but as for right now, I really hope it stays the same.
We love our hobby, and we're gonna fight to keep what we love.
When John F. Kennedy came into office, he was advised to endorse a plan authorized by Eisenhower to invade Cuba in order to spark an uprising against Castro. On April 17, 1961, 1,600 Cuban exiles landed at the Bay of Pigs on the south coast of Cuba. Within 48 hours, the men were captured by the Cuban army. In June of 1961, President Kennedy and Soviet Premier Khrushchev met in Vienna to discuss the East-West confrontation, but nothing was resolved. Both sides continued to increase their military power. The U.S. had more missiles, and the Soviets felt threatened by the presence of the U.S. missiles in Turkey, just 150 miles from the USSR. Castro traded with Khrushchev, who treated him like a friend, so when Castro sought protection from another U.S. invasion, the Soviets rushed to his aid in order to have their own missile presence felt near the U.S. Wednesday, October 17, 1962. Photos taken by a U-2 reconnaissance pilot uncovered Soviet SS-4 nuclear missiles in Cuba. President Kennedy was informed the following morning and immediately convened with his advisors, XCOM, who supported an airstrike followed by an invasion. Others recommended a blockade. For the next 3 days, President Kennedy continued his planned schedule, which included campaign trips to the Midwest. But another U-2 flight revealed more missiles, prompting President Kennedy to meet with Soviet Prime Minister Andrei Gromyko, who denied the Soviets had any weapons in Cuba. Monday, October 22, 1962. President Kennedy addressed a fearful nation.
To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated.
The military alert was raised to DEFCON 3 as U.S. ships prepared for the naval blockade. Cuba also prepared by mobilizing all of their military forces. Wednesday, October 24th, 1962. Soviet ships approached the U.S. quarantine but held their position after receiving a radio transmission from Moscow. According to Secretary of State Dean Rusk, we were eyeball to eyeball and the other guy just blinked. But the crisis was not over. Thursday, October 25th, 1962. A nuclear attack could have occurred at any moment, so the military alert was raised to DEFCON 2, the highest in U.S. history. The Soviets were confronted by U.S. Ambassador Adlai Stevenson in the UN, but they refused to answer.
You will have your answer in due course. I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over.
Friday, October 26th, 1962. XCOM received a letter from Khrushchev in reply to Kennedy's speech stating that the Soviets would remove the missiles from Cuba if Kennedy publicly guaranteed the U.S. would not invade Cuba. Khrushchev sent another letter asking for the removal of missiles from Turkey after a U.S. U-2 spy plane accidentally flew into Russia, while another was shot down over Cuba. At Robert Kennedy's suggestion, they ignored the second letter, responding only to the first. Sunday, October 28, 1962. Khrushchev announced over Radio Moscow that the Soviets would dismantle the missiles in Cuba, averting nuclear war.